Hello, and just off the back of our keynote there, looking at new technologies for AML and CTF, we can understand that as the pace and complexity of the financial ecosystem continues to increase, the effectiveness of AML efforts is largely contingent on government's readiness to innovate in a strategic and coordinated manner. And this is what brings us to our next panel. With a focus on data and analytics, today will be a unique opportunity to directly hear from supervisors and FIUs from Japan, the Philippines and New Zealand on how they are adapting strategies to identify and harness opportunities for the use of data analytics, and how these analytics and other initiatives are supporting intelligence, supervision and enforcement. First, we have our keynote speaker from today, Hiroshi Ozaki, Director of AML CFT Policy Office of the Japan Financial Services Agency. Ozaki-san has worked in banking and multiple government agencies over his career. He's served in senior AML and financial crime roles at some of Japan's largest institutions, and he's been in his current position at the FSA since 2018. Welcome, Ozaki-san, and thank you for your insightful keynote earlier.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you, Regulation Asia, having me today. And it's my honor and privilege to have this kind of a good opportunity to exchange the opinions and observation. Thank you very much.
Next, we have Detective Inspector Christiaan Barnard, Head of New Zealand Police's Financial Intelligence Unit. Christiaan is a career police officer with over 20 years service, and he's worked in a range of investigative roles. He's worked at the FIU for 4 years now, and he's currently leading a transformation project to make the FIU more data-driven. Christiaan also leads New Zealand's public-private partnership. Welcome, Christiaan.
Thanks, Brad, and look, thank you very much to Regulation Asia for the invitation. Certainly looking forward to this panel discussion today. It certainly is going to, hopefully it's going to be thought-provoking.
Definitely, I must admit, I'm really happy to be moderating this one. But finally, our last speaker for the day in the panel is Attorney Georgie Racela, Executive Director at the Philippines Anti-Money Laundering Council. Mel took over the AMLC in 2017 and has led a broad reorganization at the agency, transforming it into a hybrid FIU with supervisory functions over covered persons and entities. Before this, Mel was with the Philippines Central Bank for 21 years in various roles. Welcome, Mel.
Thank you very much, Brad, for having me in this panel, and I'm honored to be with distinguished speakers such as Christiaan and Ozaki-san.
Wonderful. I guess, just to kick off and drawing on from some of the themes from Ozaki-san's keynote earlier, given the new technology initiatives in Japan we've just heard about, Christiaan, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the transformation projects you're working on in New Zealand at the FIU there.
Yeah, sure. Look, the key to our transformation our program is around the democratization of the data, which means that what we're wanting to do is see that the FIU data is made available to all of the entities and that need access to it. Currently, or traditionally, the FIU has acted as a gatekeeper. We've received the information, analysed it and disseminated it. But we're now moving to a framework where we want to be able to provide the data to our law enforcement agencies and to our and supervisors and other key agencies for their use, but providing them though with some really good tools so that they can ask really complex questions of the data themselves, saving the FIU from having to do a whole lot of analytical work, and they can use that directly in support of their investigations and operations. A key part of that will be the applications that we'll be developing, which will be within the software, which will be specific to the varying needs required of the different groups that will be having access to the data. And then what will be underlying that as well is a machine learning component, which will be focusing on anomaly detection. And with the anomaly detection, there'll be a number of different alerts that will be produced in terms of looking across all of the data that we receive. So that's our suspicious activity reports, our international funds transfers, our border cash reports, and our large cash transaction reports. And that'll be looking for anomalies and looking to automatically alert interested parties. So it could be that police officers who are running an investigation into somebody will automatically receive alerts as intelligence comes in. Alternatively, for analysts, if they identify something that's very anomalous and there's some form of potential predicate offending, it'll be escalated to them automatically for review, and having a human eye looking over it to determine what the next step will be with it. So we'll be moving from currently only having about 30 staff having access to the data. We're hoping to turn that into hundreds and hundreds of staff across multiple agencies.
Interesting. It sounds like you're really looking to scale the operations there. I mean, Mel, I understand the AMLC is also exploring new data capabilities, but you're very uniquely positioned. You're both an FIU and a supervisor. I mean, can you explain to everyone, joining us today, what you mean by a hybrid FIU model and that you operate under? And what is your view on the use of technology across AML and CTF?
Happy to do that, Brad. So the AMLC is a hybrid FIU in that we only do not function as a financial intelligence unit. We all know what a financial intelligence unit does. That is receiving, analyzing, and disseminating information to law enforcement agencies. We also supervise our covered persons in that we ensure that our AML laws, rules, and regulations are being observed by our covered persons. Now, there are several supervising authorities that we co-regulate with, such as the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, which is the central bank, and the supervisor of banks and money service businesses, as well as other savings and loan associations. We also have a supervising authority, the Securities and Exchange Commission. They supervise our stockbrokers. We also have the Insurance Commission as co-supervisor. They supervise the insurance companies. And of course, our Philippine Amusement Gaming Corporation, which supervises the casino operators and license and give them licenses. So for all other covered persons, it is being supervised by the AMLC, such as the DNFBPs or the designated non-financial businesses and professions. And you missed also saying the AMLC also incidentally, actually it's not incidental, but it's mandated to investigate money laundering as well as terrorism financing. So we are in a unique position to investigate these kinds of crimes, again in partnership with our other law enforcement agencies, which are mandated to investigate the predicate offenses. We all know that money laundering is a derivative offense. There must be a predicate offense before we can prosecute for money laundering. So we partner closely with our law enforcers in order to obtain evidence. And another unique function that we are placed in is we likewise prosecute. So we file cases to freeze the assets. We file cases to forfeit the assets of our money launderers, as well as file money laundering cases and terrorism financing cases. So those are the functions of the AMLC as a hybrid financial intelligence unit. So in regard to our data capabilities, so as an FIU, we have several information technology systems in place. The first one is we have a semi-automated suspicious transaction profiling system, which categorizes STRs filed with the AMLC according to high, medium, and low. We also have a data mining software in that all transactions exceeding a certain threshold will flag an alert within our system, and we should be able to drive our attention to such transactions if they exceed those thresholds. There are other circumstances for which our transaction monitoring system would raise an alert so that our attention will be driven at on these kinds of suspicious transactions that we receive.
Excellent. I mean, from the discussion so far, and this would go without saying, technology is obviously crucial for information sharing initiatives. I mean, Ozaki-san, I mean, going back to your keynote from before, Japan's POC was of particular interest. I mean, how do you see the POC being expanded over time? And I guess more importantly, criminals don't operate in isolation. In fact, they're operating in a borderless world. From your perspective, does the POC have the scope to expand across borders? Have you engaged with other regulators on the broader potential use case of this POC?
Thank you, Brad, and thank you, Christiaan and Mel. So it's quite interesting information. And so before that, I'd like to share my private, personal impression of the hybrid FIU. It's my dream comes true kind of the type of organization. So supervision of the financial institution on DNFAP, and the investigation and the prosecution. So that's the kind of a FinCEN type and a very strong and powerful organization to fight with the FinCrime and the terrorist financiers. So this is a very, compact and very good organization. I appreciate, but it's my personal view. So in Japan, it's a separately. We are financial supervision, and FIU is a national police agency. So regarding the POC, so as Christiaan mentioned, so our supervised machine learning is a kind of a very, very good fit to this kind of the streamlining of the false positive detection by the rule-based or scenario-based transaction monitoring system. But the problem is this POC used the supervised data or teacher as the mega banks are submission data. So, but idealistic, we'd like to use the teacher or supervised data is a kind of the real useful STR used for their conviction or investigation. So they are very classified information, and we have their feedback from FIU from time to time, and directly to us or directly to the FIs. So, but information sharing and the collaboration between the financial supervisors and FIU is very important to obtain the good quality of the information as the supervised information. So of the STR. The real useful STR is the STR which is used for the investigation and directly linked to the conviction. So, but that data is not so easily to obtain by the supervisor. So that's the kind of challenge and issue we'd like to overcome in the future. And next point of the current situation of the POC and after POC action is the Japanese Bankers Association is considering about how to implement. So it is not an easy job. It takes maybe several years, maybe 3 years or 2 years. So they are just started how to make their, organize their platform, the governance and the fees and what kind of the option of the menus and what is the real demand in the industry and what kind of the challenge and issue related to private data protection law and regulations. So there are so many pain points they have to consider and handle. So it have just started and we are strongly supporting. And so that's my comment, and I'll turn it back to the mic to Brad. Thank you.
Wonderful. I mean, I love your comment about the pain points, but also making things compact. I mean, Christiaan, as I understand, you're heading the public-private partnership in New Zealand. I mean, how do you address data privacy issues when it comes to having to share information with banks or banks' information? And how do you use this in the intelligence gathering process?
Yeah, so we have some provisions in our legislation that enables the FIU to share. It's defined as a law enforcement purpose, but that actually has quite a broad definition. And that enables us to share with anybody. So within the context of the public-private partnership, it is a highly operational group. We brief the 5 banking members about current or pending covert operations, which is quite sensitive, as you can imagine. And what we're operating under is the requirements on them. We're providing them with risk information that they can then use to assess against their customer holdings. And then if they identify anything, they then have their obligations under the Act to submit SARs. So it's a way of engaging with them around the submission of SARs. So you've got that. So we've got that piece of information sharing, which is not financial intelligence. It's actually around it's operational intelligence that we're providing them. So it's often situations where we're looking at our National Organised Crime Group will be coming to will come to the table and will present on a significant operation that they're working on. And then we follow that up with what we call an alert. So that provides the basic information for the banks to be able to then use in support of the presentation that they receive. And this has proven to be highly successful. So, I mean, for us, New Zealand is a small country. We're only a population of 5 million people, bearing in mind. So the numbers probably sound small, but since November 2019, we've issued 80 alerts, and that has generated over 600 SARs. And what we find from that is and they're in direct support of operational outcomes. And we get a high level of engagement from the banks because often they're toiling away working in an environment where they know very little about their customer, and they're operating at the level of suspicion. And that means that a lot of the submissions that they make ultimately don't get acted upon because there's either insufficient information or perhaps it may be that actually yes, on the face it was suspicious, but we've looked at it and it transpires there was nothing in it. And they're actually able to direct some of their resource in direct support of operational outcomes. Now, one of the other advantages of the relationship is our ability to share SARs within the group. So in this, if we're looking at a particular issue or a problem, we can look to act as a hub where we'll release information that we on a subject that we're interested in. We'll receive SAR reporting back. We'll compile that into a report, and then we will distribute that report that contains the SAR reporting from the different reporting entities back to them. We've had quite a successful example of that with a mortgage fraud operation, where we sought about identifying mortgage frauds, and we acting under the assumption that people would go from one financial institution if they got turned away because there are anomalies in their information that they provided. They would simply learn from that mistake and move to another financial institution. And so what we're able to do is get them to consult with their lending teams and submit as SARs any suspected mortgage fraud instances. We receive those in, we then re-disseminated that, and of course we got hits across all the other banks saying actually this person who's tried and got turned away here has got a mortgage with us. And so that enables them to start going down their own track of ECDD when in relation to that customer. But we also identified operational criminal targets out of that. So there's one particular matter which involves a group of offenders have accumulated 14 properties fraudulently worth about 12 million New Zealand dollars, which is probably about 8 million US. And that matter has been referred to the Serious Fraud Office, and they're currently working on that. We are working towards implementing regulations which will enable the reporting entities to collaborate on SARs. And I guess in order for them to have a similar situation into the States with a consortium model where they are able to go away, identify a target, collaborate together and share their own holdings around those particular individuals and develop what can be only called a super SAR, which would then be submitted back to us. And that could be, what the regulations will enable them to do, it can either be off the back of information we provide, but alternatively, they may very well identify their own subjects of interest, collaborate together, and then pull that intelligence and send through to us a very comprehensive suspicious activity report.
Excellent. I mean, super SARs. It's a new term for me, but I think I'm understanding is that basically you're seeing the success is it's essentially de-risking the banks and pushing the bad actors out of the system. I mean, Mel, I also understand that you're heading up a public-private partnership and information sharing initiatives. I mean, that also address data and privacy issues. I mean, what have been some of the direct results and success from the PPP from your perspective?
Yeah, Brad. So let me give you a context of our PPP and the direct results of said PPP, and then I'll give you some overview of how we tackle the privacy issues. Rather than just acting as a regulator all the time, the AMLC initiated a partnership program called our Public-Private Partnership Program, or PPPP, which is operationalized by our Information Sharing Protocol. The PPP allows the AMLC and the private sector to work within a framework that encourages coordination and collaboration in the areas of information exchange and capacity building in order to enhance each other's abilities to address money laundering, terrorism, and terrorism financing. It is our alternative to the rigid rule-based approach to compliance with the law, where the government presents itself as an authority, ensuring compliance under the consequence of penalty and sanctions. Under the PPP, both parties enter into a partnership to institutionalize an effective documentation mechanism that performs targeted suspicious transaction monitoring and reporting and develops valuable or breakthrough investigative leads. So, for instance, the AMLC shared its first study on online sexual exploitation of children, or child pornography, covering the period 2015 to 2018, which includes the list of approximately 3,000 persons of interest with its PPP partners. These partners, in turn, incorporated the findings of the study and the names of the identified suspected offenders or persons of interest, as well as facilitators, in their respective AML-CTF monitoring systems. This then disrupted payments prior to transfers related to online sexual exploitation of children, or OSEC. This partnership provides valuable intelligence and alerts on financial transactions relative to OSEC that pass through the private sector's platforms and on clients who avail of their services. An outcome of the PPP is evident in this study, we issued our post-2019 OSEC study, covering now the period 2019 to the first semester of 2020. The study found that STR submissions relative to OSEC have increased by 1,654% and 156% from 2019 to the first semester of 2020. This increase is primarily due to AMLC's study on OSEC, and which was shared with AMLC's partners, and they responded accordingly by filing STRs. Are we allowed to share under the privacy laws? The answer is yes. As soon as I was appointed as executive director, we immediately requested for an opinion from the National Privacy Commission, which is the governing body implementing the national privacy laws in the Philippines, an opinion on whether or not the national privacy laws or law applies to the AMLC. In other words, can it share information about citizens without violating the current privacy laws? We explained that the AMLAC is the country's financial intelligence unit, and in order to be effective on this function, it is essential that it shares processed information to law enforcement agencies and other FIUs worldwide. The governing body sustained our mandate and ruled that if what we are sharing are processed information, then it will not be violative of the national privacy law if we share details of our private individuals.
Excellent. It's interesting to see the different approaches that different jurisdictions are taking in this process. And I've actually just written down the comment about facilitators. I want to pick up on that in a few seconds. But just quickly moving from information sharing to around STR or SAR, SARS filings. I mean, a few regulators that I've spoken to over the past 12 months have really talked about defensive reporting, especially over the past 12 months with a lot of the challenges that we've seen. I mean, Ozaki-san, are you seeing the same trends in Japan around defensive reporting?
So it's yes and no. Sorry about that. It depends. So, but generally, defensive reporting we are not appreciating. We are not happy, and maybe our Japanese FIU colleagues doesn't happy with the defensive reporting because the total number of the STR in Japan now reached the 400,000, and currently 432,000. It's a big number. So now, they have to focus on more on the quality of the STR. but it depends. That's why I said yes and no. So during our dialogue with each FIs, some FI is just automatically sending STR after the detection. So we are saying, please do not do that. Stop it. And open case and research and investigate and submit to STR. And others, very conservative, and taking time and do our investigation and research by the FI side, don't take 2 or 3 months. It depends, but you have to do what you can do. But do not do the reporting automatically submission. But open case, research, and submission. Maybe 1 month from detection to submission. And judgment and submission is just a few days. That's what we are persuading to the FIs. And defensive reporting, no. That's our basic position.
It's incredibly interesting, and I think that you've touched on a really interesting point there, is about when they actually do the reporting, right? Is it straight away or after investigations, which I'm sure we'll chat about in a second. But I mean, Mel, it'd be good to get your thoughts. I mean, given you guys have just gone through an STR quality review, one, can you share some observations and recommendations from this review, but also your perspectives on defensive reporting? Are you also no, we don't like it, or do you have a different approach in the Philippines?
Yes, Brad. So in connection with the defensive filing of STRs, so we regularly perform suspicious transaction quality review. So the most recent of which is in 2021, where we were able to assess 2.4 million suspicious transaction reports filed within 2017 to 2020. 40% of said 2.4 million were filed only in 2020. So the study aims to provide a trend analysis for the covered periods 2017 to 2020, assesses the technical compliance and investigative value of the STRs, and identifying reporting gaps and challenges of covered persons to provide guidance on how to improve quality of STRs. Some of our findings are as follows. Abuse in the use of SI6 as a suspicious indicator. SI6 is described as transactions that are similar, analogous, or identical to any of the mentioned suspicious circumstances. We have 7 suspicious circumstances, one of which include those transactions related to unlawful activities or predicate offenses. So it is supposed to be, SI6 is supposed to be a catch-all category of suspicious circumstance. Using SI6 as the reason for filing may downplay the risk and prioritization of STRs, which I mentioned a while ago. We adopt a semi-automated STR profiling system. Also, covered persons that use SI6 with high-risk crimes as the additional reason enables them to circumvent our registration and reporting guidelines requirements of mandatory uploading of know your customer documents for the following predicate crimes: kidnapping for ransom, drug trafficking and other related offenses, hijacking, destructive arson, and murder, including those perpetrated by terrorists against non-combatant persons and similar targets, terrorism and conspiracy to commit terrorism, and terrorism financing. The second finding is that some covered persons indicate transaction monitoring system alerts as their additional reason for SI6. Submitting STRs merely due to TMS or transaction monitoring system alerts without further investigation may also be considered as defensive filing, similar to the finding in SI6. Number 3, there are various non-conformity with the AMLC registration and reporting guidelines. Said guidelines mandate covered persons to answer the 5 W's and 1 H questions. These are who, what, when, where, why, and how, so that said reports may be valuable to the AMLC. And number 4, numerous STRs were filed without properly designating the suspected unlawful activity or predicate offense as defined in the Anti-Money Laundering Act as amended. This is considered as a less serious violation under our existing laws. So to instill discipline to covered persons, the study recommended that if it can be proven that the failure to properly designate the unlawful activity was done intentionally so as to mislead the AMLAC in the prioritization of the STRs, this may constitute a criminal offense for malicious reporting under the existing laws. In such case, the person shall be subject to a penalty of 6 months to 4 years imprisonment and a fine of not less than 100,000 but not more than 500,000 at the discretion of the court. So what we did with this study is to refer this to all supervising authorities, such as the Central Bank or Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Insurance Commission, as well as our Philippine Amusement Gaming Corporation, and even to the AMLC's Compliance and Supervision Group, which is our supervisory arm. It serves as a trigger for opening enforcement actions on the part of supervisors, including the AMLC. As for the AMLC's part, our Compliance and Supervision Group will evaluate and issue show cause letters. And after evaluation, said group will prepare a report of compliance with recommendations requiring covered persons concerned to submit an action plan with timelines to improve their processes and the quality of the STRs they submit to the AMLC and or to impose sanctions. Notice that the AMLC is more concerned about corrective measures rather than just penalties, which nevertheless the AMLC will not hesitate to impose whenever necessary.
I'm writing that one down, corrective measures. I like that data point there. I mean, there's a few things here I wanted to unpack. From Ozaki-san, you mentioned 432,000 SARS. Mel, you mentioned 2.4 million. Christiaan, I'm assuming New Zealand maybe has a slightly different problem, but I do think based on our previous discussions, you have a very different attitude towards defensive reporting. So one, is defensive reporting a problem in New Zealand, and what are your thoughts around it?
Sure, and volumes-wise, and again, reflective of the size of our country, we receive about 17,000 SARS every year. And defensive reporting is, of course, something that we are alert for and we certainly receive. However, one positive aspect of defensive reporting is that it actually demonstrates an engagement with the AML-CFT regime. And that means that actually it's simply an education piece that we need to go back and give them some instructions on actually how they can better submit SARs that are either or not submit SARs if they haven't met the threshold. One of the key issues that we tend to find is the understanding of what suspicion is. What is the threshold of suspicion? And that will often drive a lot of defensive reporting because generally the way that it's interpreted is it's interpreted using the common understanding of suspicion, which sits within the realm of speculation, something that's unusual. Whereas that's actually not the threshold for reporting. The threshold for reporting is where you form a reasonable grounds to suspect. And there's only one way you can determine that. You might identify something that you speculate to be unusual or could be connected to some form of criminal offending. But you actually then need to, and as Mel pointed out, you need to undertake some form of inquiries or investigation. And one of the key parts of that is actually conducting contact with the customer. Now, that falls into another area that causes some issues, and that's around the concept of tipping off. And there's often concerns around if we contact the customer, and we see it a lot in our SARS, or we haven't contacted the customer because we're concerned about tipping off. Now, in our jurisdiction, tipping off comprises of effectively telling them that you're submitting a SAR. It's like it's a disclosure that you intend to, but you can't be mind readers and start assuming that you think that your activity is going to collectively cause them to form a belief that a SAR is going to be submitted. You have to put that to one side because generally speaking, a conversation with the customer is either going to allay your concerns or it's going to increase them. And of course, it may very well be that we can, by educating around the threshold for suspicion and what it means to tip off, goes a long way towards improving the quality of the SAR reporting. And another element of that as well is that under our legislation that when you formed a reasonable grounds to suspect, you have 3 working days to submit a SAR. Now, again, people interpret that as being, well, at the point that they've formed their speculation, that they've got the ball rolling, that is my 3 days, the clock is ticking. And so they will do a real rush job on the investigation and then feel like they need to submit it to being compliant. Now, messaging to the reporting entity is no, your 3 days for submission occurs when you have interrogated that speculation, conducted your inquiries, and then considered all of the evidence you have, and at that point you formed a reasonable ground or not to suspect, and that is when you've got 3 days to submit. And so that has been our messaging and our guidance for reporting entities in terms of trying to improve the quality of the SARS and reduce the defensive reporting. But just going back to my original point around the engagement and the demonstration of engagement, is that I would probably prefer to get too many SARS from an institution who is attempting to do the right thing, who is engaged in the AML-CFT program, than none at all, because then, and where it's a demonstration of not being engaged.
I mean, it's always going to be a balance, right? You can't have none,
Absolutely.
but you can't have too many at the same time. But I think across all 3 speakers, we've heard, quality over quantity, right? But more importantly, It's about the timing. When do you actually report? It has to be after you've actually done some due diligence, you've done the investigation. It's not just because we've flagged something along the way. I guess I just wanted to pick up on one point that, Mel, you mentioned around corrective measures. I mean, when we look at our frameworks, and I'm really keen to get all of the panelists' thoughts on this, how do you measure success, right? What is the overriding goal? And more importantly, have your measures of success changed? Mel, I mean, maybe with you, what are your thoughts? How do you measure success, and have your measures of success changed?
That is a very difficult question, because we perform a lot of functions. As mentioned, we are a hybrid FIU, but comparing to my predecessor, with all due respect to all of them, the AMLC during my tenure has issued 28 risk assessments and studies, compared to not more than 5 to my predecessors who have been there since 15 years ago. And we, as an FIU, the AMLC was tagged as a customer service FIU prior to my appointment, because we merely react and provide information upon request of law enforcement agencies. During my tenure, we have shared more than 1,000 proactive financial information to our law enforcement agencies. As a supervisor, we have, as mentioned, we have issued more than 20 risk assessments and studies. We also have issued more than 20 policy issuances. And then comparing this with my predecessor, which issued probably less than 10 regulations and 1 risk assessment. And in regard to our corrective measures and enforcement actions, we have collected so far 51 million pesos. And then this may be too small for others, but comparing this to my predecessor, whose penalty they have collected was merely at less than 1 million pesos. And more importantly, because of our hybrid nature, we need to really institutionalize the capacity building, both of our analysts, investigators, and lawyers. So as an FIU, which is the only FIU within the country, it is very important that we partner with our foreign FIUs. And so to train our analysts, we have partnered with Australia's FIU, or AUSTRA. To train our investigators and lawyers, we've partnered with the U.S. government, the U.S. State Department, as well as the U.S. Department of Justice, to train them. So these are well institutionalized within our framework, and I think these are the measures of success that I may be proud of.
I mean, yet again, it's quite a lot given the complexities in the world that we're operating right now. I mean, Christiaan, how do you measure success, and has it changed, the measure of success?
So in terms of success, I mean, New Zealand has done exceptionally well in terms of confiscation, and we have recently celebrated, meeting our milestone of restraining $360 million over the last 4 years in assets. And that has been, driven by some highly skilled investigators and leaders within the asset recovery unit in terms of achieving that outcome. The other side, of course, and this is not to take away from that achievement, is that when we assess our overall money laundering risk assessment, there's probably close to $2 billion in annually that is assessed as being capable of being laundered. So in the context of our seizure of which is 125 million New Zealand dollars every year, we're only restraining 5% of the criminal process. 5% of the criminal process, which is by an international measures is high, but it still would appear that crime pays. Now, when I look at the what the FATF is trying to achieve and what the purpose of the Anti-Money Laundering, the Countering the Financing of Terrorism Act is, it's around prevention. And of course, prevention is a very challenging thing to measure because you have to measure non-events. And the only way you can do that in this type of environment, is to try and baseline offending and risk for a period of time, and then implement your measures and see if you reduce them. But the challenge, of course, in our area is that we've seen such transformation over the last 20 years through the impact of new technologies, the changing face of the financial system and the way that criminals operate, have meant that it's actually almost impossible, or it's a very challenging thing to genuinely baseline and understand the reductions. So in that regard, from my perspective and the way that the messaging that we're pushing for our reporting entities, that we're not going to arrest and restrain our way out of this. This is something where the reporting entities play a key role in the detection and disruption and the prevention of organised crime. And that's where we want them to be much more proactive in the action that they take. Now, of course, we've got challenges around balancing de-risking, in terms of ensuring that we're not impacting upon financial inclusion or targeting or inadvertently targeting the wrong people. However, they need to be, rather than sort of effectively being a party to the offence of money laundering, which often they are. So essentially they are being a party to the crime, but they are able to then stand behind that by saying, well, we've reported it to the FIU, but we'll still let the transaction happen. Is actually being much more proactive in stopping transactions, de-risking customers who seemingly are using their services to facilitate their criminal offending. And it's only through that disruption that we can then see what we're wanting to. Our strategy is around wanting to push criminals to the margins. We want them to engage with those institutions that are high risk, that are criminally minded, that are prepared to take on these types of customers and act on their behalf. And then that is where you deploy your law enforcement resource, and it becomes a choke point. So that is a strategy that we're wanting to employ. Of course, it's a long journey in terms of changing mindsets, especially around this concept of thinking that it's okay for me to launder people's money because I've told the FIU about it. It's all good. It's actually, well, that's not good enough. What we want is financial institutions to be much more proactive around stopping transactions and de-risking customers. We're appropriate.
Wonderful. And Ozaki-san, I mean, we're just very, very mindful of time. I wanted to see if you had any final thoughts that you'd like to, or key messages you'd like to get across.
Yes, make a long story short. So we are a financial supervisor, not a law enforcement agency. We do not have some kind of the key performance indicator to measure the success in a numeric manner. But we are putting more focus on effectiveness and of the prevention measure of the obliged entity and the FIs. So we have action plans and how to implement the risk-based approach in obliged entities, and it's open information. We are in the final process of the part of mutual post-round evaluation. So New Zealand have just done, and we are now in the final process. So we will get in the next year. This year is the first year of the 5-year follow-up. So it's a very good indicator to measure our progress of the implementation of the risk-based approach to supervision and prevention measure in the financial industry. So that's our focus. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'm sure we could talk for ages, especially around that mutual evaluation, given everyone's experience on this panel. But unfortunately, with that, we're out of time. Thank you very much to our expert panel, Hiroshi Ozaki, Director of AML, CFT, Policy Office of the Japan Financial Services Agency, Christiaan, Barnard, Head of New Zealand's Financial Intelligence Unit, and Attorney Georgie, Racela, Executive Director at the Philippines Anti-Money Laundering Council. Up next, we have data detectives, AI, ML, and data analytics in practice. Thank you so much.